Guruve Gaura Chanjaya Radhikaya Tadale Krishna Krishna Bhaktaya Tad Bhaktaya Namo Namaha Vancha Kalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhuvevacha Patitanam Bhavanevyo Vaishnavevyo Namo Namaha Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasari Shri Gaura Bhaktavinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Dandavat Pranam devotees. So want to do a answer to a question that was sent to me. It is again a question, even though I made request that I prefer trying to answer questions or trying to absorb myself in researching and understanding questions more related to our practice and theology. But in some ways, as I mentioned before, especially when it comes to talking about practice of bhakti, that's not always just a matter of theological or philosophical considerations, but it may be a consideration of the life process and how we're coping and dealing with various aspects of life. So a person wrote me let me find what they wrote first of all. Get my phone out here. So this is from someone. They're asking that I don't mind if you use my name. As part of what I'm asking you about, for me, is that I feel a comfort zone in making myself known. So I have no problem with you using my name if you want to. I noticed you have not used names in any of your questions and answers. And my reply to that is, even though I know you don't mind, I think I've kind of standardized the idea now that maybe of not using someone's name. And I think that if you want, you're always welcome to comment in the thread and identify yourself. And that way I've left that completely up to you to do, rather than to maybe perhaps say, okay, you feel that way, I could use your name now, and then maybe, things do not pan out in terms of how people may have appreciated or not appreciated your questions or whatever it might be. So just as a matter of not putting yourself in a position where you'd have to either respond or deal with energy that you would not want, or maybe unwelcome energy that may not be negative, but just you don't want to deal with, I will leave that up to you. That's just a policy now I've kind of established, especially when it comes to, well, all questions actually, but especially questions that deal more with more personalized issues. All right, so on to the question. And again, everybody writes questions and they write it very long. So I've watched your videos quite a bit. I've been very appreciative of your perspective on things. And though I'm not initiated, okay, I have been around the Hare Krishna Society for many, many years. My question revolves around the alternative community, and I would imagine that means LGBT community, because she said alternative community, but I've identified she's a she, and put a flag there. And I am curious to know what your perspective is, not on the issue of people having alternative life experiences. She calls it alternative life experience. That's interesting. I haven't heard that so much as a way to describe everything. I'm not asking so much your opinion on people's having alternative life experiences, but your perspective on how their interaction with religious societies, so I guess she's not identifying just particularly the Hare Krishna movement, but religious societies, how you view people in the alternative life community dealing with that. So that's kind of a gist of the question. I tried to skip through because there's a lot of additive things here. You know, and I'm thanking her off the script here because she's been very kind to me in terms of speaking about enjoying and really getting a lot out of these questions and answer sessions on various topics, and it's helped her in Bhakti a great deal to understand things. But to the gist of the question, which is, I guess, how those who, and I've not heard that used as a popular, I've actually, I think maybe have spoken something like that in the past, I cannot remember, but the use of the term alternative life experience, that was a phrase she was using, and how they interact essentially with religious society. So I don't think she was exclusively meaning the Bhakti community or the Krishna conscious community, so to speak, but just in religious communities in general. So I don't have really an idea of how many other organizations, and even frankly speaking, the institutional Krishna consciousness society elements, you know, particular sanghas, ISKCON or Gaudiya Math, etc., exactly what their standard of dealing with people who have alternative life experiences, what their administrative policies and all these things are. I'm not managing any temple or running any temple or anything like that. And I think I did do a video some time ago answering a question from a colleague of mine who was a former work colleague of mine who had a particular unique situation come up in a church where he's the bishop. And we had a discussion. He's always valued the Krishna conscious perspective on a lot of life things. And so he asked me what would be the Hare Krishna, I think his term was, what's the Hare Krishna take on this? Was the way he phrased it or something like that. But anyway, but speaking to the issue itself, I think there's always two things to be considered. And one is the organic human interaction person to person. Then there is the inorganic sort of mechanism that sometimes gets behind any kind of human organic dealings, and based on an agenda of that inorganic element, creates something other than human interaction around it. So what I mean by that is that if really people in general, regardless of your particular life experience, can't come together and they talk, then you'll find that there's so much ability to communicate, so much ability to see things in a much more clear perspective. But when any organic human experiences are conflated with other types of agendas, whether it be political agendas especially, or socio-political agendas, etc., it becomes muddied. And therefore the conversation never is around human dealings, it's around ideas and agendas and ideologies. And it loses its organic nature and starts to become something which, you know, breeds division or breeds the inability to have honest communication, so forth and so on. So let me unpack it a little bit, and using my time wisely at the same time. I think I explained before on the very tape that I spoke to the former colleague of mine. Every one of us is a soul. So therefore, nobody is exactly the manifest life experience that they're living. Their manifest life experience is the culmination of prior activities lived, prior desires, current desires, and current impressions. So those four things kind of come together and create a situational reality materially for each soul. and the soul is vicariously identifying with that material arrangement. So essentially, everyone is the soul at the root reality. Now, that karmic portfolio that each person has a subjective and an objective presentation. The subjective presentation means that which is experienced in the subtle body, means the mind, the intelligence, and the egoism, the principle of egoism. And then there's the objective expression, which is the physical expression of a body made of 5 elements, earth, water, fire, and ether. So our karmic portfolio is the combination of these two situations, a subtle body and a gross body. The subtle body and the gross body are themselves, in many cases, two separate experiences. So, because we live in, I'm giving you an example, and then I'll get into the meat and potatoes, if that's not a great saying, Mukunda, but the gist of our conversation. But when we're young, we spend so much time divorced from our objective presentation, our physical body, and become absorbed in our subtle body in various ways. When we're in school at a very young age, we have all kinds of things going on in our mind about what we want to do in terms of being a famous athlete or being a entertainer, or it doesn't matter what it is, or going out and playing with friends, whatever it might be. We take absorption in that subtle body and divorce it almost practically from the physical body, which is why the teacher has to come around and start tapping on the table. It's not tapping you on the hand back in my day, telling you to pay attention, right? So we realize very clearly that there's separate ability to become absorbed in the subtle body of the mind, the intelligence, and the egoism, right? And that the objective body, the physical body, is not always directly connected, with that subtle body in the sense of what we're experiencing as a feeling. So bringing it home to the point, my understanding is that people may have subjective experiences clearly of many things in terms of their makeup and their subtle body. But the reality of the objective presentation is usually going to be of two things, male or female. So here, meaning an objective presentation of male and female means the physical body. But the subjective experience may be varied completely. So that's the karmic reality of how people are composed. Now, if people understood that, if they understood what the makeup of the soul, then the subtle body and gross body are, it would be much more easy to digest how a person may have alternative experiences in their subtle body, even though their gross body only can make two objective expressions, right? So now, obviously, that kind of philosophical bent is going to be found more deeply in like a path like bhakti or something that's along those lines of yoga or some other kind of more philosophically oriented faith system. Other faith systems which really revolve more around tradition and history of practice, etc., may not accommodate on a philosophical level all of the things I was just talking about, and may look at things only and primarily from what they would consider to be a expected unification between the subtle body and the gross body. That they won't digest this idea of a separate experience in the subtle body, which is a subjective experience, and a separate experience in the gross body, which is an objective experience. Objective here meaning this is what everybody perceives in their sensory perception, right? So a lot of practices won't accommodate that because in the historical makeup of that faith system, that's just been the teaching, right? So in those particular societies or faith-based organizations, it will be more difficult to have this conversation. For those who are in the even more broad philosophical faith-based systems, it will depend on also how they're acknowledging and practicing that system. So you may find, and let's bring it home to in the practice of bhakti, as we have in like our Gaudiya Math or ISKCON society, etc., again, you may have people who take the practice in a certain way and therefore have less, even though there's a philosophical basis for understanding what I just talked about, may still deal with everything according to the actual just historical practice of how things are in what they would consider a normative societal expression, right? So no, there's men, there's women, and we're not going to make that differentiation of subjective and objective realities, etc., even though it's in the philosophical framework of the practice, right? So now we come to another point, which is how social interactions just in general go on, and then we can look at it more closely at how it goes on in particular in relation to any faith-based society. So one thing would be just in a society in general, when what we just spoke about becomes conflated with, like I said, socio-political agendas, etc., there's not really a true, always organic communication that goes on. So let me give you an example of what I'm talking about. If we acknowledge that we have a subjective and objective expression, right? A subtle body and a gross body. And we acknowledge that everybody has this, and we're asking, right, no matter what your situation is, everyone is asking for mutual respect of their experience, right? So, for instance, if you have a subjective experience, and I'm just going to give an example, and then you could expand it out to everything else. So, if you have a male body and you have the subjective experience of being female, right, and you want that experience honored, you want people to understand subjectively I have an experience as being female, but objectively I have a presentation of a male body, right? So, in the same way that you want your experience validated, you would have to validate, because there's a certain kind of consistency that has to be there, you would need to equally validate someone else's experience. Now, let's say someone else has an experience subjectively of being male and objectively being male, right? Or objectively being female and subjectively identifying as female. So now, that person who has a subjective and objective experience has to be honored as well. So if you were to approach that person and explain, let's say we're having two people talking, having a conversation, and you're explaining, listen, I identify as a female or I identify as a male, even though I may have a female or male body that's the opposite expression. And the person who has a sort of unified, so to speak, objective and subjective experience says, okay, yeah, I honor your subjective experience. Does that mean that the person whose experience subjectively and objectively is one thing has to now give up the experience they're having and only accommodate your experience, or vice versa? Do you have to give up your experience and only accommodate theirs? No. So if two people are just organically talking, you probably find a lot of natural, organic, so to speak, acceptance of people, especially when there's an understanding of the root person being the soul, of people having their karmic portfolios and their subjective and objective experiences. It would be pretty natural. Yes, I'm experiencing that, though I have a female objective presentation, but I actually identify as a male. Okay. Yes. That's your experience. That's a genuine experience. And it's a part of a karmic portfolio. So, it's not something to be dismissed, because that's that person's unique karmic DNA, etc., etc. Now, if you say then, I demand that you acknowledge me as a male. Now what you've done is you've taken your experience and you have not become satisfied in your own experience, but now you force that experience onto someone else and are forcing them to acknowledge something that may not be in their experience. In other words, if they're experiencing you objectively as a female, that's their experience. And they may not be obliged to accommodate your subjective experience, just like you're not obliged to accommodate theirs. You're not obliged to accommodate the idea that even though I experience myself as a male, though I have a female body, but I'm obliged to get rid of that or dismiss it because your experience is not like that. So you can understand really quickly that if there's communication and organic discussion, then really people will all be mutually honoring each other for wherever they are and whatever they're about. Now, when you conflate that with a socio-political agenda or anything else, it becomes different. Because now you end up with inorganic machinery behind either side of that equation, and one side of machinery tries to force a societal norm to everybody by disregarding one side's experience, or the other side tries to raise up a machinery to fight that machinery, right? To say, no, we're going to negate any experiences on that side. So I'm hoping this is all making sense. And as soon as that happens, the human organic individual ability to communicate gets lost in that. And now people simply align with various sides of the larger machinery, and they're fighting social political battles. They're not having individual human discussions. And they're not doing individual human honoring process, so to speak. But they're being forced into defending a particular posture. And this is where you get division, problems, arguments, ill feelings, and so many other things. But for the average person, if they are not perhaps, if they have some sense of individuality, so let me put that in as well, because people can be socially engineered and socially conditioned also. And I think I did express that somewhat, where they can't accommodate another experience. But if it's put on the table, like, I'm not asking you to change your experience. I'm not asking you for you to have to see me as male if I have a female body. That's your personal experience. But mine is that I am a male even though I have a female body. And you can't change my experience. So when there's that kind of mutual understanding, oh, okay, I'm seeing you as a woman. Okay, that's fine. That's what you're seeing. That's part of your experience, right? We're all not the body, right? But if that's your experience, that's fine, right? Because what I feel is not going to be dependent on how you're having your experience. So that's very easy. That's very natural. That's very organic. And it's real because these are real people with real experiences. When they're merged into the machinery of social politics, then we're fighting like multiple agendas, because the agendas are never about one thing. They're about a whole ideology. So they're conflating my individual experience with a whole ideology of other stuff I may have nothing to do with, right? On both sides of that coin. If I personally have the experience of that I have a male subjective experience and a male objective experience, that doesn't bar me from recognizing and allowing people, not allowing, but recognizing the natural reality of someone else's subjective and objective experiences. It may not oblige me to have the same subjective experience you're having. And if you truly are being, honoring for everyone, you wouldn't expect that. So I'll give you an example. The idea of the use of certain pronouns, right? In one sense, I've always questioned the validity. I'm not questioning the idea of people saying, I want to use these pronouns, and where people don't mind using those pronouns with you because in their own experiences, whatever they might be, that's something that they resonate with or don't mind, that's fine. But let's say somebody else says, well, no, I wouldn't prefer to use pronouns. Can I still be honoring your subjective experience? Sure, sure. But it also gives the viability of me having my experience. Whereas if I'm forced to utilize a different nomenclature and everything else, it's like invalidating my experience and forcing me to accept only a subjective experience and have to deal with things like that. And I think that's where things start to lose the ability to organically and harmoniously live and communicate and everything else, and starts to become agenda-based or ideology-based. I'm sorry. Right? So, in a short, concise way, hopefully, I admire also your bravery in saying you want me to go ahead and speak your name, but I'll give you the option to put that in the thread, as I mentioned, as a policy. Now, I think I've established clearly that it doesn't matter what the subject or question is, that I don't utilize names of people who've written in things. So hopefully that was okay. And you did have a footnote thing here. Let me go back and look at it again because I've been talking and I might have missed it. Oh, wait a minute. Hold on. Let me scroll down. You're asking me about, now this is really, this is strange. You're asking me about one music artist, a rapper named Tom McDonald. So sometimes, what is it, fact is stranger than fiction or something? Because somebody sent me some things of his some time ago, and somebody just sent me something new of his, because obviously I've had a background in music and so forth. And in general, I'm not really into hip-hop, so to speak, or rap music, so to speak. I've worked with some artists in the past, but that was strictly about business back in the day. And in the latter part of my musical career, I actually would, in many cases, recommend another artist, another friend of mine or something, if there was a gig like that. I just didn't resonate a lot with the theme of the music and so forth and so on. But I did listen to what was sent to me, and I actually sent it to someone else, because I thought that his presentation of messaging in that genre was pretty far out. I mean, that he would make the gist. I have not heard everything or whatever that he's done or whatever, but the things that were sent to me were so heavily message based that I thought, wow. I mean, and what I understand, he's an independent artist, so he's managed to create a career. Like I worked for one group for many years, and it was also independent. We were able to completely be successful as independent artists, and that's a very difficult thing to do in an industry that, pretty much, of course it's easier nowadays, but that completely dominates the idea of artists and the music presentation in general. They control the distribution of the music, what gets played, what doesn't get played, and he's managed to create an independent stance for himself, and at the same time be at the top of the musical community in that genre, and have the kind of messaging he's doing. I was shocked quite when I heard the first thing. When somebody sent me the second thing, I was even more shocked that his messaging is all about the conscious awareness of what these social dynamics and social engineering are all about, and he has a very large audience for it. And so I was very impressed. I was impressed. Like I said, I'm not big on secular music in general in many cases, but certainly not necessarily in the genre of hip hop or rap music, because so much of it has been, in my earnest opinion, destructive part of social engineering, especially in the minority community. So I've not been a fan, and for the many years that I did work in the music industry, I kind of actively spoke out on how music and media in general is used to carry out certain kinds of social engineering that's not healthy for our young people. Because, when you do anything that's entertainment, you tend to bring your filters down, right? We have naturally, in our intelligence, we have a kind of filter that allows us to analyze things before we allow it to be digested into our consciousness. But the nature of watching movies or hearing music and other kinds of things that we consider entertainment, we tend to drop filters when it comes to those things. And therefore, they kind of bypass any scrutiny and go directly to the consciousness. So if you continuously get subliminal messages about sex, violence, drugs, illicit ways to obtain money and so forth and so on, what do you think will dominate your consciousness? What do you think will nourish your worldview? Right? So I've never been a fan of, utilizing, especially because music also has a certain hypnotic quality to it, right? So I've never been a fan of utilizing music to give negative messaging. So I was, pleasantly surprised to see that, it wasn't deeply spiritual messaging, but there was some undercurrent of God orientation, and but most of it was about social engineering and the nature of the, socio-political dynamics that we see now. And I thought, though I may not agree with everything, I thought that even messaging that and having success in messaging it was pretty amazing, that he was successful in doing it. So yeah, that's what I feel about that. And like I said, when I saw that at the end, I was really shocked because just yesterday I played it for my wife. I had sent it to one other devotee who had also heard about it. And so I thought that was one of those, I don't know what the saying is, fiction being stranger than fact or vice versa. But yeah, because I just heard yesterday, so she's asking me if I had ever heard about him. And I acknowledged it was a she who was writing, right? All right, so if anybody has anything they want to add to the discussion, certainly feel free to do so in the thread. Again, this was not really like a philosophical question and answer, so it was really more of a personal perspective on things. So it wasn't really, certainly older devotees, I always stand to be corrected in anything. But again, this was more of a personal insight into something. And maybe I'll just run it again, which is basically if people have subjective and objective experiences and everybody honors everybody's subjective and objective experiences, we probably would not have any division or conflict around them. But when they're conflated with socio-political ideologies, then it doesn't become any more individual human organic experiences that are acknowledged. It becomes ideological warfare, so to speak. And the nature of ideological warfare is that the seeking of imposing an ideology on somebody or somebody else imposing their ideology on the other person. So that's where the disconnect comes in trying to not acknowledge, I don't think that's the right word, to understand and honor people's individual subjective and objective experiences, right? And I think that terminology of subjective and objective experiences is good because it breaks it down to a point where we can understand from those who do have a philosophical observation point, it's more clear, right? That it is a karmic reality that people are experiencing, because you will have in some faith-based societies the idea that it's some kind of abnormality, some kind of, something else that's not what it is. Everybody has an individual karmic DNA, and their karmic portfolio is the combination of what their previous desires, aspirations, and activities were. That culminates in exactly what kind of body experience everything that you have right now in this body. It's called Prarabdha Karma, Aparabdha Karma, Kut, and Bid. These are the different divisions of karma, and they produce exacting results. And what we do now is in pursuit of experiencing that karma which has become ripe and creating further karma, unless our activities are fully spiritual, in which case they're not connected to the karmic cycle, so they're called akarmic activities or spiritual activities, right? So, but as long as you are creating karmic activities, it will come out as an exact expression of the combination of what you've done, what you aspire for, etc. So all those things will come together in an intersection and create your karmic portfolio, which is unique, and everybody's experience is unique. At what time certain experiences arise in your heart, etc., including, but slightly different, when, if you've had any prior impressions or sanskars, they're called, in bhakti, that also comes out. It doesn't matter what your external, subjective, and objective experiences are. If you've had any experiences with bhakti, there's one verse that says, "Apraktana aduniki chasti yasyat bhakti vasana." Whatever impressions you have in bhakti, they will also come out. So regardless of your objective, subjective experience, those impressions in bhakti, which are completely transcended to the material arena, will manifest in your life at a time when they're supposed to come out. And that's when it doesn't matter what your objective, subjective experiences are. A person will start turning towards looking at bhakti and seeing, there's something there that resonates and something that's there for me. And I need to go and investigate that, right? And it doesn't matter what your material situations are, right? Because that's a calling of the soul. It's not a calling of your material. In fact, it bypasses that, and it rises up as spiritual impressions that attract a person to come towards the path of bhakti. All right, so I never look at things in the thread. Maybe do that right quick before I end. I don't know how to get, I don't know what to, maybe should I be swiping this thing or something? Let me see. I can't see all the different comments that may be there in the thread. I see the last two. One devotee's watching, and then, Anjali Didi. Haribo. I'm looking at everything. That a rapper tweets, forget Stonewall, and also LGBT folk have died murdered for their subjective experience. Let me see, I have to hit the button here. Hijras were honored and their pronouns by Prabhupada poetry to none of the. Do we defend their experience? So, various cultures around the world, because this is a karmic experience, everywhere in the world this experience is there, right? Objective and subjective experiences. So in India, there's a class of hijras, and there's other names, so it wasn't just this class. But in that community in India, from my travels to India and what I remember, there are communities, and they have whole occupations and everything else, right? In terms of, how they sustain the community, etc., etc. So in terms of honoring anyone's subjective, just to be very clear, honoring everyone's subjective and objective experiences is a human quality because it's karma. So it's not something that we can choose, I don't like this or I do like that, etc., etc. And like I said, what is mostly the problem is impositional ideology. It's not individual experiences. It's impositional ideology. That either on one side or the other, people are forcing, you have to be like I am, or you have to accept what I feel about this. But in the natural, organic human experience, if somebody has a subjective experience of being male or female and objective experience is different, then that's their individual karmic portfolio. And nobody has anything to do with that, right? Now, if someone tries to impose, no, you can't have that experience, that's ridiculous. Because it is what it is. It's an experience. It's genuine. On the other hand, if somebody has that experience and then they try to impose the idea that everyone else should acknowledge that experience in the same way I'm experiencing it, is also equally wrong. Because they're also having an experience, right? And we cannot, somehow negate their experience and call that honoring mine, which is what happens in the ideological imposition mode. The idea will become, well, just invalidate your experience and accept mine. And one of the ways this happens is by ascribing a victim quality to the experience, right? Now, is probably, not probably, but it is historically factual that people from various kinds of experiences go through social issues, up until including being killed or harmed, etc., etc. So that that ideological imposition on a community can certainly be spoken about because it shouldn't happen, right? But it's not it is not a mode in which we can then say, as a pushback against one kind of ideological imposition, will strengthen the other side and make a ideological imposition going the other way. No, the problem is the first ideological imposition. That if people are having subjective and objective experiences, as you mentioned in India, is acknowledged as a community, right? And I don't think you find as much of an ideological pushback against that community or anything like that. I've not looked at it in depth. I know in certain countries there's a very heavy ideological pushback on anybody who has subjective and objective experiences that are different, right? But to have ideological pushback in the other direction is not the answer. The answer is coming back to the neutral position of understanding, first of all, what's going on. Because a lot of the ideological pushback on the side of those who say, well, they don't understand or don't want to deal with subjective and objective experiences that are different from each other, their ideological pushback on that is due to a lack of understanding. Because if you clearly understood what was happening, then it would lead to honoring. Okay, this is that person's objective and subjective experience. But when you don't understand it and ignorance prevails, then obviously you want ideological imposition. Same thing when on the other side, a kind of, let's say, ignorance of absorption in the victimhood of the community at large arises in the heart, there's a sense that we could rise up and ideologically, by numbers and so forth and so on, we can rise up and ideologically impose on the other side. Again, we're back to what I spoke about earlier, which is ideological or socio-political agenda conflation with the very organic human experience. And so you get this kind of warfare going on. And that's not beneficial really to anybody except those who are benefiting by the other things that come from that socio-political agenda, by having numbers on their side in that basis, right? Other than that, it doesn't do anything to serve the actual human experience between people, right? Because then they're just being divided. So, any other things I can't see so much? Yeah. All right, Didi. Okay, ideological pushback will come back to honoring the other side. Okay, I see. Thank you, Angela Didi. She's kind of taking notes, maybe on what I'm saying to put it in written out form. All right, my Dandavat Pranam. And for the, I don't think she didn't put her age, even though she said I could say her name, she didn't really put an age. But having described it, she's been around the movement for quite a while. I would take it that I'm offering to this lady and this Bhaktin actually, because she's been around the devotional society for many years, and so she has that quality of interest in Bhakti. So I hope this was helpful, and I also am very much humbled actually by your appreciation of the other videos, and I truly hope they're helpful in your progress and search in Bhakti, and then I would consider that I'm actually rendering a service to you, and in that way maybe you will also pray for blessings for me to advance also in Bhakti. Jai Vancha Kalpaturvishya Kripa Sindhuvevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Jai Radhe Radhe.